Have you ever recoiled from a pigeon on the street? Don't answer out loud. I know you have. We've all done it. You're walking through a square. The bird takes a step toward you, and you instinctively pull your foot back, as if it could infect you with something. As if it's not a bird, but something unpleasant that's better left untouched. We even came up with a name for them. Flying rats. A convenient term? It allows us not to think. But I want you to think today, because what you currently know about pigeons is almost nothing. And what you don't know is one of the strangest, most beautiful, and slightly uncomfortable stories in the relationship between humans and animals. Let's start with one fact that turns everything upside down. The pigeon is the first animal that humans used as a tool. Not a horse, not a dog, a pigeon. And this happened before the wheel was invented. Think about that for a second. The wheel is one of the main symbols of human progress. Yet the pigeon was our tool even before that wheel started rolling. It's not an urban bird that adapted to garbage bins. It's a creature that has walked alongside us since the dawn of civilization. But let's first figure out what it actually is. The rock pigeon, the very one you chase away in the square, is not a city bird in the biological sense. It's a cliff-dwelling species. Its ancestors lived on rocky ledges, in mountain crevices, and on sea cliffs. And its brain, literally, physiologically, is structured in such a way that it does not perceive trees as nesting places. It simply doesn't see them as an option. However, the ledge of a 5-story building and a cliff on Mount Etna are the same to it. Absolutely identical. Not metaphorically, but neurologically. This means that the pigeon did not adapt to the city in the way that, for example, foxes or raccoons have learned to open trash bins. The pigeon simply found itself in an environment that accidentally matched its nature. We built cities from stone and concrete with ledges and cornices, and it saw its cliffs in that. It's not its choice, it's just coincidence. We created the perfect habitat for it without even realizing it. Now let's talk about what makes the pigeon a truly remarkable creature. And here I want to discuss navigation. You've probably heard that pigeons can find their way home from hundreds of kilometers away. That's true. But how exactly they do this is a question that scientists have been trying to solve for over 140 years. And the answer turned out to be so unexpected that when it was finally confirmed, some researchers simply couldn't believe it. In 2024, scientists from the University of Munich established that pigeons perceive the Earth's magnetic field through the semicircular canals of their inner ear. That same organ that helps you maintain balance. That's how the pigeon senses the planet's magnetic field. It's like imagining that you can determine directions not with a compass or by the sun, but by literally feeling how the Earth pulls you in a certain direction with your entire vestibular system. The most astonishing part of this story is not the discovery itself. It's that the idea of magnetic perception in pigeons was first proposed by the French zoologist Camille Viego back in 1882. For 140 years, it was considered a marginal, almost laughable hypothesis. It wasn't taken seriously. And in 2024, it turned out he was right. One person, 140 years ago, without modern equipment, simply observing the birds, saw what science has only confirmed now. But the pigeon doesn't navigate alone, and this is where a completely different story begins. A study from the University of Bristol, published in 2024, revealed something that was previously thought to be an exclusive privilege of primates. When pigeons fly in a flock, their roots improve from generation to generation. Young birds fly with older ones, learn from them, but at the same time, they make slight adjustments of their own, and these adjustments are retained. The next generation takes the improved route and enhances it just a little bit more. This is called cumulative culture. It's when knowledge is not just passed down, but accumulated and refined. Each generation leaves the next a slightly better version than it received itself. Until recently, it was believed that only humans and some other primates could do this. Now, pigeons are on that list. The very bird you recoil from in the square passes down accumulated knowledge about roots to its offspring, just as we pass down culture. Now let's talk about the brain, because here things get quite uncomfortable. Over the last 30 years, the pigeon has become one of the main model organisms in neurobiology. Scientists use it to study categorical thinking, the ability to group different objects into one category based on shared characteristics. You see different chairs, wooden, plastic, with armrests and without, and you understand that they are all chairs. The pigeon does the same. But what's most interesting is how exactly its brain does this. Researchers from the University of Iowa point out that the mechanism of categorical thinking in pigeons works in much the same way as modern neural networks in artificial intelligence. This is not a pretty metaphor for a popular article. It's a scientific observation. A bird with a brain the size of a walnut processes information based on principles that we ourselves have embedded in the foundation of machine learning, without knowing it, simply modeling nature. And finally, a fact that almost no one knows, even though it shatters another stereotype. Pigeons feed their chicks milk, not in a figurative sense, but literally milk, produced in the crop of both parents, both the male and the female. Under the influence of prolactin, the same hormone that triggers lactation in cats, dogs, and humans. Mammals and birds arrived at the same solution completely independently of each other, separated by hundreds of millions of years of evolution. Nature invented milk twice, and the second time it was the pigeon. So, a cliff-dwelling bird whose brain sees your city as its native mountains. A creature that senses the Earth's magnetic field with its vestibular system. A species that transmits culture from generation to generation. An animal whose brain operates on the principles of artificial intelligence. And a bird that feeds its chicks milk. This is not a rat with wings. This is one of the most complex beings you see every day. And don't notice, 3,000 years. That's how long the pigeon has worked alongside humans. Not as a pet, not as decoration, but as a tool on which the lives of people and the fates of nations literally depended. And when I say worked, I mean that word. Worked. Every day, in any weather, without the right to make mistakes. But before I tell you about wars and sieges, let's start with one specific date. Not with a vague "in ancient times" or thousands of years ago. With a precise date, around 1350 BC Egypt, the flooding of the Nile. The Nile flooded every year, and how high that flood was literally determined everything. A flood that was too low meant drought, famine, death. A flood that was too high meant washed away fields, destroyed villages, the same famine. The ideal flood meant a harvest that fed millions of people. And to manage this, information was needed, quickly, from various points along the river that stretched for thousands of kilometers. The Egyptians used pigeons. Observers in different parts of the Nile sent birds with messages about the water level. And this information was gathered in the center faster than any messenger could arrive on foot or horseback. The pigeon participated in managing the food security of an entire civilization. It didn't decorate a palace courtyard. It wasn't a symbol of something lofty. It worked. Like a telegraph, like the internet, like an early warning system. Think about that. 3,300 years ago, the pigeon was already part of the state infrastructure. Let's fast forward to 1870. France, the Franco-Prussian War. Prussian troops surrounded Paris, a city with a population of nearly 2 million people, and cut it off from the rest of the world. No telegraph lines, no roads, a complete blockade. Paris was isolated as tightly as an island in the middle of the ocean. And then the Parisians did something incredible. They placed pigeons in woven baskets and sent those baskets over the siege line in hot air balloons. The balloons flew out of the city, landed in unoccupied territory, and there the pigeons were received by couriers. And then the pigeons flew back on their own, over the line of Prussian troops, across fields and forests, straight into besieged Paris. But that's not even the most astonishing part. They reduced the letters using microphotography, a technology that had only been around for a few years at that time. On one tiny film sheet that the pigeon carried on its leg, up to 1,700 individual messages could fit. Letters from London, Brussels, Bordeaux, through London, through neutral countries, through photographers and postal services, made their way to besieged Paris on the leg of a bird. Over 4 months of the siege, more than 1 million messages were sent this way. 1 million. People wrote to their families, passed on business instructions, reported births and deaths, and all of this flew over the heads of Prussian soldiers in a small leather cylinder attached to the bird we today call a rat with wings. August 1917, the North Sea. The British fishing trawler Nelson. Thomas Crisp, the ship's captain, 50 years old, a fisherman all his life. That day, a German submarine attacked the trawler without warning. A shell hit the hull. The vessel began to sink. Crisp was mortally wounded. Shrapnel pierced his abdomen and he couldn't stand. He asked the crew to bring him a pigeon. Dying, lying on the deck of the sinking ship, he wrote a message with coordinates and attached it to the bird. The pigeon was wounded in the wing by shrapnel. One wing was functioning poorly, but the bird took off, and it made it. With a damaged wing, over open sea, it reached the shore and delivered the coordinates. Rescue boats set out immediately. The crew was saved. Thomas Crisp died on his ship before help arrived. He was posthumously awarded the Victoria Cross, the highest military honor in Britain, and the pigeon, whose name history did not preserve, simply flew away with its injured wing and did what it was trained to do. Now, a story after which I ask you to just stop for a second and imagine it in detail. Italy, 1943. Allied forces are moving toward a small town. British soldiers are already preparing to enter. American bombers are already in the air. The order to strike the town has been received, and the planes are en route. And at that moment, it turns out that the British troops have already taken the town ahead of schedule. The strike will hit their own. There's no communication. The radio isn't working. The planes are in the air. They're flying. They have orders, and no one can stop them. Except for one pigeon. The bird was named G.I. Joe. He was released with a message to cancel the strike. He flew 32 kilometers in 20 minutes and landed at the command post of the American Air Force just minutes before the bombers were supposed to reach their target. The strike was canceled. Thousands of British soldiers were saved. G.I. Joe received the Dickin Medal, the highest military honor for animals in Britain. His stuffed body is still kept in a museum in Detroit. He died in 1961 at the age of 18. He lived to old age, unlike many people he saved. But the pigeon was not only a military tool, it was also part of the business infrastructure. In the 19th century, New York newspapers fought for readers as fiercely as they do today for views. And one of the main competitive advantages was the speed of news delivery from Europe. Ships from London and Paris arrived in Halifax, a Canadian port on the Atlantic coast, before reaching New York. And newspapers kept special reporters in Halifax whose sole job was to meet the ship, take fresh European newspapers, write a summary of the main news, and send it to the editorial office by pigeon post. While the ship was still sailing to New York, the news was already at the printing press. This was not romance or exoticism. This was pure competitive strategy. Whoever gets information faster sells more newspapers. And the pigeon was part of this business model as naturally as the internet is part of it today. And finally, about the symbol. The white dove as a symbol of peace. We all know that image, but few know exactly where it came from. The image has roots in the Christian tradition. The dove as a symbol of the Holy Spirit. Noah's dove that brought back an olive branch after the flood. But in popular secular culture, this image entered through a specific person. Pablo Picasso painted his famous Dove of Peace in 1949 for the World Congress of Peace Supporters. This drawing became one of the most reproduced images of the 20th century. But here's a detail that almost no one knows. Picasso's father kept pigeons. The artist grew up with these birds. He painted them from childhood. It was one of his first themes. When he needed a symbol of peace for all humanity, he took what he knew best from childhood. And one more fact that I find truly astonishing. The pigeon is the only living creature that serves as a positive symbol in every major world religion. In Christianity, Islam, Judaism, Buddhism, everywhere, the pigeon carries something good. Not a single negative connotation, not in any tradition. No other animal on the planet can boast of this. So, 3,000 years alongside us. The pigeon fed the Egyptian civilization, maintained communication in besieged Paris, saved drowning sailors, halted bombings, delivered news to newspapers faster than any steamboat. It was our telephone, our internet, our emergency alert system, long before we invented any of that. And after all this, we called it a rat. There's one question I want to ask you right now, not rhetorically, really. When exactly did the pigeon become an enemy? Not gradually, not "it's always been this way," but specifically when, because that moment has a precise date, and it's much closer than you think. 1986, New York. A city newspaper publishes a complaint from a restaurant owner about the birds that are interfering with his business. In this complaint, the phrase "flying rat" appears for the first time. Up until that moment, nowhere, in no Western publication, in no official document, did the city pigeon have a stable negative image. Less than 40 years ago, one irritated restaurant owner, one phrase in one newspaper, and now the whole world knows that word. I want you to feel how strange this is. 3,000 years, a tool, a partner, a symbol of peace, and 40 years, a rat. The bird hasn't changed. The city hasn't changed. It has always been stone, always been noisy, always been filled with food and garbage. Only one thing has changed, our attitude. We came up with a label, it caught on, and now we perceive it as a fact of nature, even though it's just a cultural construct that hasn't even been around for half a century. But let's be honest. The negative image has real grounds, it's just that they aren't the ones usually cited. Let's start with diseases, because that's the first thing people say when it comes to urban pigeons. Pigeons can indeed be carriers of some diseases. That's true, but here's what's important to know. In numerous studies of urban ecosystems, not a single confirmed epidemic among humans has been traced back to urban pigeons. Not one. The risk exists theoretically, just as any contact with any animal is theoretically dangerous. But the real documented threat to the health of city dwellers from pigeons is statistically negligible. The real damage is different, and it's measured in money, in stone, in marble. Pigeon droppings contain uric acid at a very high concentration, and this acid destroys limestone and marble faster than acid rain. Not just a little faster, significantly faster. Venice, a city literally built from stone and standing on water, spends tens of millions of euros every year just on restoring facades from pigeon droppings. This is a well-documented, long-standing, very costly problem. Cathedrals, palaces, bridges, all of this is slowly being destroyed by bird acid. That's the real problem. Not mythical diseases, but chemistry that eats stone. And since we're talking about Venice, something very telling happened there. St. Mark's Square was probably the most famous place in the world where pigeons were fed. It was a tourist tradition. Postcards featuring it were sold everywhere. At one point, around 40,000 birds lived in the square at the same time. 40,000 in one square. In 2000, Venice introduced a ban on feeding pigeons with fines of up to 500 euros, strictly without compromise. And it worked. The population in St. Mark's Square fell from 40,000 to just a few thousand birds in a few years. A drastic reduction without a single pigeon killed. They simply removed the food. But there's another approach. And I find it more interesting. German cities, Stuttgart, Augsburg, Munich, chose a completely different strategy. They built special controlled pigeon lofts right in the city limits. The birds live there, receive food, lay eggs, but the workers at the lofts regularly replace real eggs with decoys. The bird sits on the egg, incubates it, but the chicks simply don't appear. The population gradually decreases naturally, without poisoning, without culling, without dead birds on the streets. Both methods work, but the second requires acknowledging that you're dealing with a living being that can be interacted with intelligently, rather than just an enemy that needs to be exterminated. Now I want to tell you about money, because here the pigeon turns out to be something quite different than it seems. Pigeon racing is one of the oldest organized forms of animal sports on the planet. The first official competitions were recorded in Belgium in 1818. This is older than most modern sports, older than professional football, older than the Olympic Games in their modern format. Today, the largest races are held in Taiwan. The prize funds there are measured in millions of dollars. This is not a hobby for retirees in the countryside. It's an industry with serious money. with professional breeders, with international auctions. In 2021, a pigeon named Armando was sold at a Belgian auction. The buyer, a Chinese collector. The price, €1,600,000 for one bird, for one pigeon. For comparison, there are about 1,000 officially recognized breeds of pigeons in the world. There are about 400 breeds of dogs. We've worked 2.5 times harder on pigeon breeding than on dog breeding. Those very dogs we call man's best friend. And now, the hardest part of this story. Alongside the rock pigeon, the one you see every day, existed its closest relative, the passenger pigeon. It looked similar, was slightly larger, with a long tail. It lived in North America and was possibly the most numerous bird the Earth has ever seen. Estimates suggest its population ranged from 3 to 5 billion individuals. Flocks were so huge that they darkened the sun for hours. Witnesses described it as darkness in the middle of the day. In 50 years, we wiped them all out. Not gradually, not accidentally, deliberately. The meat of the passenger pigeon was cheap and accessible, sold in bags at markets, fed to slaves and the poor. Hunting was done on an industrial scale. Birds were shot, caught in nets, beaten out of nests with sticks. From 5 billion birds, not a single one remained. The last passenger pigeon lived in the Cincinnati Zoo. Her name was Martha. On September 1st, 1914, she died in her cage, alone, the last representative of a species that just half a century ago was the most numerous on the continent. September 1st, 1914. This is not a legend, not an approximate date. This is the exact day when an entire species disappeared from the face of the earth. And now we come to the conclusion, to the contradiction from which everything essentially began. We took a wild cliff-dwelling bird. We domesticated it before we invented the wheel. We used it to manage civilizations, to transmit information across front lines, to save lives on sinking ships. We created 1,000 breeds, more than there are breeds of dogs. We built entire cities from stone that accidentally turned out to be the perfect environment for this bird. We raised it alongside us for 3,000 years, and then one irritated restaurant owner wrote a complaint to a newspaper, and we called it a rat. The pigeon hasn't changed. It's the same as it was 3,000 years ago. The same cliff instincts, the same magnetic compass in its inner ear, the same pigeon milk for its chicks, the same cumulative culture in the flock. It simply lives alongside us, as it always has. We changed, we became wealthier, and we no longer needed its labor. We invented the telephone, the telegraph, the radio, the internet, and it became unnecessary. And what's unnecessary is very easy to turn into an enemy. Just come up with the right word. And in 40 years, the whole world will think it has always been this way. We are the only species on the planet that created another being for our needs, domesticated it, bred it, used it for 3,000 years, and then called it a rat when it ceased to be useful. The next time a pigeon takes a step toward you in the square, don't recoil. Just look at it for a second. Before you is a creature whose ancestors saved people in war, maintained communication in besieged cities, and sensed the Earth's magnetic field.